This is a Delphi philosophy video, the story of how Delphi, a young girl from ancient Athens, became a philosopher. And you can become a philosopher too. All you have to do is listen to the story, and when we get to a big question, try and think of a great answer. You can maybe pause the video and tell someone what you think, or tell them why, or ask them what they think. As long as you're using your brain and having fun, you can't do it wrong. So, let's get started. This is the story of when a girl named Delphi met a demon. But don't worry, Delphi, if you haven't met her before, is not someone who is usually scared of things like demons, monsters, or grown-ups. In fact, she is that most determined of creatures, a 9-year-old girl, and like a lot of children, she has a talent for arguing, asking questions, and generally being difficult. She has already, in her short life, growing up in a district near the centre of Athens, met gods, monsters, and worst of all, adults, who think they should teach her things. Some of them have even been famous philosophers, people who seek out wisdom by asking unanswerable questions. But she has never met anything quite like a demon. So perhaps we should worry, just a little bit. But Delphi doesn't know any of this yet. At the moment, she is sound asleep in front of the fire, wearing a stubborn frown that says that whatever she is dreaming about, she is not winning. Delphi is going to wake up in a second. Perhaps it's best if you listen closely. She will probably need your help. There will be questions, but not necessarily answers, like this one. Do you think Delphi knows she is dreaming? Delphi woke up. Now, when human beings wake up, their brains immediately launch into some very important questions. This can happen very quickly, and we often don't remember we've asked them. Question 1. Who am I? This is a perfectly normal question to ask in that split second after waking up. The answer sometimes isn't obvious. I'm Delphi, thought Delphi. Question 2. Where am I? The brain wants to sort this out as quickly as possible too. I'm at home, Delphi thought, in the front room by the fire. Question 3. Is this real, or am I still dreaming? This one can be tricky. Delphi rolled over and opened her eyes. She must have fallen asleep on the rug again. Delphi stood up, a bit stiffly, and stretched. She padded through the door and into their small courtyard. The day still looked rather cloudy, and there was a bit more of a chill in the air. She shivered a little and wandered over to the wooden enclosure in the corner. Good afternoon, Sino. Her tortoise was asleep, his bottom sticking out under a large lettuce leaf. As ever for Delphi, her mind filled with questions. Do tortoises dream? What is a dream, anyway? What other questions could you ask about dreams? It wasn't too far away from sunset now, so Delphi decided she might as well head out to the bathhouse. Bathhouses were reasonably new to the city, and Delphi rather liked them. However, being a girl in ancient Athens meant that she had to wait until the men had finished using the water first, which was something that she didn't like to think about, especially when she was up to her neck in it. It usually smelt a bit better if you got there earlier. She stepped out her front door and shut it behind her. She immediately felt a soft brush of fur against her bare feet. It was one of the local cats. It looked up at her with deep yellow eyes and made a wise-sounding meow sound. Cats were said to be bad luck, but it was cute, so she gave its ears a quick tickle before heading off down the street. The streets grew busier as she neared the Agora, the central market, temple district, and gathering place in the city. She skipped past a man loading forkfuls of hay onto a cart, before a couple of men pushed past her, going in the opposite direction. She quickly skirted round a ragged man in a tattered cloak, and got as far as pushing past a rich-looking merchant in gold and purple robes before crashing into someone. Are you lost, little girl? Delphi stood back and looked at the person she had crashed into. They were wearing a brightly painted and rather ugly yellow-beaked mask of a duck, and was dressed in an elaborate costume of black and white, which wrapped tightly around their thin body. The man, probably a man, Delphi thought, women were more sensible, was hopping from one foot to the other like a frog who really needed a wee. Are you from theatre? She asked. There were always actors out on the streets before a new play, trying like hell to get people to turn up and watch. I am from the realm of story, the mirror of truth, come to bend men's dreams into the void of reality, said the high voice from behind the mask, and it jumped around a bit more and started playing a rather tuneless tune on a small wooden flute. What? Said Delphi, who hadn't understood a word of that. I don't like the theatre. I snuck in once, but it was boring. There was just a load of people like you standing around and shouting things, and all the girls in it were men pretending to be girls. It's not even real." "Ah," responded the masked figure, who lowered his flute and hopped awkwardly towards her. "But who can say what is real and what is not?" Delphi thought about this, but only rather quickly. There was something about the masked man that made her feel uncomfortable. "I can," she said. "It's obvious what's real." The mask got closer. Delphi took a step back. "And who are you? And is this real?" Delphi gave him the look that children save for especially stupid adults. Delphi recognized these sorts of questions. She remembered that someone had once told her that they were called philosophical questions. At least she would have done, had she remembered how to say philosophical. Instead, in her head, they were just big questions. But these ones didn't seem that big. "I'm Delphi," she said, "and of course this is real." And she turned and ran away up the street before glancing back. Weirdo. Do you agree or disagree with Delphi? Are these questions easy to answer? It wasn't long before Delphi was sitting in the shallow water of the bathing pool, her hands wrapped protectively round her chest, watching the other women arrive. Bathhouses were large and built to hold lots of people at once, so Delphi liked to arrive early when it was quiet. Nothing spoilt a bath like an old woman who knew your grandma trying to talk to you while you had no clothes on. It was even worse when they had no clothes on either. Delphi started to paddle into the middle of the pool. It was very relaxing, as long as you ignored the smell and didn't get any of the bits in your mouth. She still felt irritated by the masked man. He had asked those questions as though they were hard to answer, but it seemed obvious to her. Earlier she had been asleep and dreaming, and that hadn't been real, but now she was awake, and it was. There was no need to go around being mysterious about it. Delphi sighed and put her feet down to stand up. Except she didn't. She found herself plunging under the water instead. Her feet didn't touch the bottom. She spluttered back up to the surface, gasping a little. Since when did they make the bathing pool so deep? She realised, with a growing sense of panic, that the edge of the pool was quite a long way off. Delphi didn't really know how to swim. You didn't need to in a bathing pool. Not until now, anyway. She splashed around for a few seconds, her heart beating faster. Kicking as hard as she could, she took a few panicky breaths, spat out some water and shouted, "Help!" She looked around frantically, but for some reason there was no one there. The bathhouse was completely empty. She managed to keep her head up for a few seconds before she plunged under again, her arms and legs flailing to keep her above the water. She felt something slither past her feet, and she screamed, fighting to get away. A dark shadow under the water curled up towards her, and Delphi held her breath. "It's a sea serpent," she thought. "There's a sea serpent in my bath." It suddenly leaped out in a spray of green water, its yellow eyes fixed on her and its sharp teeth ready to bite. Delphi screamed again, closed her eyes, and punched it on the nose. When she opened her eyes again, the monster had gone, but her friend Plato was at the side of the pool, holding a rope. "I'll rescue you, Delphi!" he cried, throwing it towards her. "No, don't! Go away!" Delphi screamed back. "I've got no clothes on!" Then Delphi woke up. Is Delphi definitely awake now? Can you be sure? Who am I? I'm Delphi, thought Delphi. Where am I? I'm at home, in the front room by the fire. Is this real? Delphi rolled over and opened her eyes. She must have fallen asleep on the rug in front of the fire again. Delphi stood up, a bit stiffly, and stretched. She padded through the door into their small courtyard. The day still looked rather cloudy, but there was a bit more warmth in the air. She wandered over to the little wooden enclosure in the corner. "Good afternoon," she started to say, but hesitated. Her tortoise was asleep, his bottom sticking out under a large bunch of grapes. This wasn't unusual for him, but something about it still felt off. Oh well, she thought. She should probably get down to the bathhouse. Delphi stepped out her front door and shut it behind her. She immediately felt a sharp scratch on her leg. "Ow!" The hissing cat leaped backwards, its yellow eyes full of menace. Delphi shouted at it until it went away, and after rubbing her leg, set off down the street. She shuffled past a man unloading forkfuls of hay from a cart, before a couple of men pushed past her, going in the opposite direction, almost making her trip over. She pushed past a tattered man in a ragged cloak, and then a rich-looking woman in a gold and purple dress. Then she stopped. She felt very strange. What was going on? "Are you lost, little girl?" came the high voice. Delphi turned around and saw the actor in the mask again, except this time the mask was slightly different. Instead of a duck's face, it was one of a rabbit. His eyes glowed a distant yellow. "I had a dream about you," said Delphi. "Ah, but what is a dream?" came the voice from the mask, and he began hopping from one foot to the other, and then, to Delphi's horror, started singing. "Poor little Delphi, lost in her dreams, learning a lesson, but not what it seems." "Shut up, that's really embarrassing," Delphi snapped, quickly checking that no one she knew was nearby. Then something occurred to her, and she looked back. "Hey, how did you know my—" But the masked stranger had gone. "Name," she finished. "I must be dreaming," she thought. She closed her eyes tight and counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. "Wake up!" The street stayed resolutely where it was, and a man swore at her and pushed her out the way as he walked past. "Plato," she mumbled to herself, and started to run away from the bathhouse just as it started to rain. Is there a way to check if you're dreaming? The rain had cleared the streets, and there was a crack of distant thunder as she ran towards where her friend Plato lived with his family. Like always, she didn't bother to ask to come in, but ran straight through their considerably larger courtyard to where Plato shared a bedroom with his brothers. He had been Delphi's friend for as long as she could remember. Plato had once been taught by the great philosopher Socrates, and got to go to school and the gymnasium and other places she wasn't allowed to go. Delphi liked to hear about what he'd learnt, and he was always good fun, in an irritating boy sort of way. What she mostly liked to do was get them into trouble, and then think of exciting ways to get them out of it again. "Plato!" Delphi stumbled to a halt just in front of him. Plato had the sort of build that could block a cart from coming down a road. It wasn't so much fat as wide. "Delphi, what are you— How do I know if I'm awake?" Plato started to laugh, but Delphi's slightly crazed look made him pause. Because you are?" "No, I might not be. You saying that I am could just be part of the dream." The rain was cold, and her tunic was almost soaked through. Delphi wrung out her braid, making a small puddle on the floor. Plato glanced down at it. "But I'm not dreaming, and I'm talking to you, so you can't be dreaming either, can you?" said Plato. Delphi shook her head, sending a small spray of water over Plato's bed. "Hey, careful!" "No," Delphi insisted, ignoring his fussing. "I could just be dreaming that you're not dreaming. I mean, if you're a dream, then I can't trust you to tell me that you're not a dream, can I?" Plato pulled a face while he tried to follow this thought. Okay, so you might still be asleep?" This kind of conversation did happen with Delphi sometimes. Usually you just had to hold on tight and wait until she slowed down to let you off. "I don't know." Plato thought for a few seconds. "Have you tried pinching yourself?" He tried. That was a thought. Delphi looked down at her arm and tried pinching herself, but not very hard, because she didn't really want it to hurt. Nothing happened except that her arm had been pinched. She looked up at Plato and shrugged. "Look, what if I do it?" He reached over and pinched her other arm. "Ow, you little—" Delphi pushed him back onto his bed, where he bounced off and landed in her hair puddle. "Okay, so do you think you're awake now?" he asked, picking himself up and sitting on his bed. "Yes, no, I don't know," Delphi cried. "How about ask me some questions?" "Like what?" said Plato. Delphi was pacing around the room, leaving a little circle of wet footprints. "Just see if I can remember stuff. Maybe if my memory isn't very good, then I'm actually still asleep." "Okay, what's my dad's name?" Plato asked. Delphi hesitated. I think it starts with an A?" she hazarded, and then caught Plato's expression. "Look, I can't remember things like that anyway. It doesn't prove anything." "Exactly, so why are you worried?" He fell backwards onto his bed and took a deep breath. "Are you sure you're not overreacting a bit? I mean, you haven't got any proof that you are dreaming, do you?" Delphi went to reply, but then stopped and thought about it. Unusually for her, she was prepared to admit that perhaps there was a teeny tiny possibility that Plato was right. Maybe it had just been a very, very strange dream. She sighed. "Okay, maybe you're— And shouldn't you be going to the bathhouse now, anyway?" Delphi was suddenly furious. "It's not your business when I go to the bathhouse, thank you very much," she snapped. Plato laughed. "Come on, I was only saving you from the sea serpent. I wasn't looking or anything." "That's not the point, you—" And then she stopped. Plato was stroking a cat on his lap. It had yellow eyes. Delphi's mouth fell open. "Oh, for—" And Delphi woke up. Her mind took over the essential questions while the rest of her raged. Who am I? Whoever I am, I'm furious, she decided. Where am I? Is it real? She opened her eyes. Ah, thank goodness. She was home. She took a little while to adjust to the light and waited for the strength to come back to her legs. Then she slowly stretched herself up until the cabbage leaf fell off her head. She gradually stretched her legs out of her shell and looked around for something to eat. There was a half-eaten grape only about 2 minutes' walk away. It was good to be home. She'd never had a dream like that before. She didn't even know that tortoises could dream of being human children. "Good afternoon, Zeno." The tortoise stretched its neck up to see where the sound had come from. There was a large but familiar shape standing over her, but something didn't feel right. "It's time to wake up, Zeno." She blinked a couple of times, slowly. "It's time to wake up." The voice was louder. "Wake up!" Can you dream about something that you've never experienced? Then Delphi woke up, rolled over, and opened her eyes. She must have fallen asleep on the rug in front of the fire again. But there was someone else in the room, someone she had seen before. "Good morning." The voice was doing an impression of cheerful, but not a very good one. She sat up and looked into the yellow eyes of the masked man. The mask was in the shape of a cat. "I know what you're thinking." The mask seemed to grin at her. Delphi blinked furiously, trying to wake up again, but the masked man didn't go anywhere. "Who am I?" it whispered. "Is this real?" Delphi looked up at the figure with wide eyes. "What are you doing here?" Delphi thought for a second. "I'm still dreaming, aren't I?" The masked man laughed. It wasn't a very pleasant sound. "Of course you are," came the reply, and the man gave a hop and a step and pranced around her again. "Poor little Delphi, still fast asleep." Ow! The masked man stepped back in shock, trying to hold the mask in place from where Delphi had just punched it. "Oh, what did you do that for?" he squeaked, holding his nose. "Stop being weird and trying to scare me," Delphi shouted. She felt a pang of guilt, but then you're probably allowed to hit people in dreams, she thought. The masked man stood back and tried to regain his poise. He stood like a coiled spring on one leg, all tension and elbows. He cleared his throat. Delphi kept her fists up. "I just thought you might like to play a little game," the masked man drawled, trying to back away and stand still at the same time. "No," said Delphi. "It's a very simple game." "No. All you have to do is find something that's real. Then you win." "What would you say? What is real?" Delphi lowered her fists. "Not much of a game, is it? There's loads of things that are real. Real life, for one thing." "Well, why don't we play, then?" The masked man moved closer, and Delphi suddenly felt a little cold. "If you win, then I will never come into your dreams again." "What if you win?" Delphi whispered, looking up at his strange eyes. "If I win," he purred, "I get—" Delphi bit her lip and found herself taking a step backwards. She could feel her heart trying to make an attempt to leap out her throat and run away. She swallowed and took a deep breath. "What does that mean?" she asked, but the masked man remained silent, twitching slightly. "I know one thing that's definitely not real," she said, "and that's you. All of this isn't real, so it doesn't matter, does it? It's only a dream." "Well, then." The masked man grinned again and stuck out a hand. "What have you got to lose?" Delphi looked at the hand. It was pale and thin and strange. She looked back up to the mask. Its cat's eyes were shining yellow. "You're right." And she raised her hand to his and shook it. The mask laughed. Then Delphi punched up with her other hand, connecting satisfyingly with the edge of the mask. There was a flicker of pain on her knuckles. She closed her eyes, and then Delphi woke up. And this time she knew she was awake, really properly awake. She was Delphi, she was at home, and she was not dreaming any more. The air felt fresher, the colours were brighter, her thoughts were clearer. "This is real," she whispered, but she had already forgotten who she was speaking to. She'd been dreaming about an argument, but her thoughts were already running away from her and escaping. She got up off the mat in front of the fire, stretched, and rested her hands on the stone mantelpiece above the fireplace. The knuckle of her left hand had been cut. That was strange. She must have caught it against the wall or something when she had been dreaming. It felt like it had been a really long dream, and though she couldn't remember much about it, it felt like she hadn't been winning. But it didn't matter. It was only a dream.